If you want to follow me today, just start at the beginning and we're going to go to the end. And you're like, huh? We're literally going to start in Genesis 1. And I'm going to take you through a story this morning that we know the story, but I think sometimes we forget the story. And I hope that the reason I'm taking you through this story will make sense in just a few minutes. You can put that video up there and just let it play. And no, this is not to make you have to go use the restroom. And it's not because it's raining outside, but I just want this image in the back of your mind while we go through this story. And there's a reason for that. You go all the way back to the beginning in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and it was void. And darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. In the beginning, the Bible depicts something. It's a word that we don't like, but it's a word that we're living right now. In the beginning, the Bible depicts a universe of chaos. You ever watched the waters as they gather over the rocks in a pool maybe, or at the bottom of a waterfall? It's amazing to watch. It's beautiful for one, but it's chaotic, unbelievably chaotic. The Bible uses a couple of words actually, to depict this in verse 1 and verse 2. And that word in Genesis chapter 1, it's a Greek word. It's the word tohu wabohu. You look so excited about that. Let me tell you what those words mean. The word tohu, it's used about 20 times in the Old Testament. And it's literally translated in vain. To be in vain or to waste. It conveys a meaning of pointlessness. It conveys a meaning of without purpose. How many of you have felt this week like you're kind of pointless? You're almost without purpose because your purpose has been taken from you, or so it seems. And that word bohu is used in the Old Testament and a couple other places, and it's translated without form or a void. So we literally have this meaning of a wasted form without void, or a wasted void without form. It's pointless. It's chaos. It's nothingness. So the state of the earth at the beginning was pointless. The state of the earth at the beginning was without purpose, and it was in a state of confusion, kind of like we are today. It may sound like a pretty good description of chaos, or it may not to you, but that's the description that Genesis gives, is chaos. And he uses water. It's an interesting concept. And it says in verse 2 there that the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, you could go back all throughout ancient times and look at how water is used, the symbology of water. And water is used to be representative of that very thing, of chaos, of something that it doesn't make sense, something that is on its own, doing its own thing, and you can't control. The ancient times talked about that, not just in Hebrews, but cultures all over the world use water to depict chaos. One ancient scholar said it this way: of all the ancient metaphors used to describe this original state of chaos, water appears to have been the most popular. Now, it's kind of hard to imagine why water would represent chaos, but it may not be if you look a little bit further. That's why I have an image on here for you. You see images of movies of giant waves coming in and taking over whole cities, the tsunamis. You remember when the tsunami hit Japan? Water created absolute chaos. It created destruction. Have you seen the videos of the tsunami coming inland and whole buildings washing down the road, cars and people, and everything is just destroyed because of this chaos that the water creates? Or have you ever been to the beach, been swimming, and it doesn't take long, and before you realize it, you're way out from the beach. And suddenly you're in trouble. You're fearful. Trent and I were at Verizon, or at whatever it is now, Simmons, about 4 weeks ago, for the Monster Truck Show. We got there a little early and couldn't go in yet, so we walked across the bridge over to the Little Rock side to the park. And I've noticed as I get older, I get a little bit further away from the edge of things. You think you're a pilot, why are you afraid of heights? It's not the heights, it's the idea of falling is the is the fear. But we're walking across the river bridge, and I'd go peek over every now and then, every now and then. And the water has always been an interesting thing to me, especially the river. It's not just a flowing, smooth pathway. There's all these little whirlpools, and you can see these really clear spots, and it's almost glass smooth, and then it falls off literally in the middle of the river to just chaos. And it's kind of a picture of what I think of the Spirit hovering over the chaos. Spirit being over this water. That's the cool thing. Even though at the beginning there was chaos, God was still present. Even in the midst of all this chaos, he's still there. From the very beginning, the Spirit of God hovering over the waters, hovering over the thing that was void, the thing that was absent. That means that God was present. He was there. He was right in the middle of this chaos, in the middle of the tohu wabohu. You're going to go use that this afternoon, I'm pretty sure of that. In the middle of the wild, and in the middle of the waste and the pointlessness and in the confusion, God was still there. You might have an idea why we're going through this story today. I want you to understand God is still there. Even in the chaos and the confusion, God is still there. It would be pretty sad if the story ended right there. If it just ended where it began. It would truly be pointless and confusion if that's where the story ended. But the good news for us is that's not where the story ended, because God's not a God of disorder. God's a God of life. He created order and life. In the following verses, Genesis in chapter 1 and verse 3 through 31, it tells how God took the chaos out of the waters and took it and formed life out of this void, out of this nothingness. He separated darkness from light, and he separated the land from the waters, and he created plants and animals and humans even. He created order and life from what was chaos and nothingness. Throughout the story of the Bible, we continually see God working in order to bring order out of chaos. Don't believe me? We're going to go through some of them. I want to show you this. If we had time, I could take you through the whole of the scriptures and show you time after time after time how God has brought order back out of chaos. We're going to go through a few of them. So let's fast forward a few years to the Exodus. God's people, we know them as Israel. They had gone through a chaos of famine. If you've been to the store recently, there's a lot of people that are fearful of a chaos of famine. I'm going to be honest, I was at the store last night. I'm not worried about not eating. I mean, we can survive on ramen noodles for 6 months if we have to. Ooh, I dread that. But I'm used to going to the store and getting my pork chops. I'm used to going to the store and getting my steak. I'm used to the store and getting my chicken when I want it. And when you walk down the aisles and you see the meat cabinets are empty, it makes you just a little bit nervous. And if we're not careful, we're on the edge of chaos of another famine. We're on the edge of chaos of total disorder. And this is the people of Israel in the Exodus. Because of the chaos of famine, they moved to Egypt. And over time, they themselves became slaves of the Egyptians. That's a big frog. They became slaves of the Egyptians. They cried out to God to free them from this chaos of oppression. And guess what? God heard their cry. So out of the chaos of the murder of children, someone rises. God saves a baby, and you know him as Moses. And even through his own murder chaos, Moses was led out into the wilderness. More chaos. But it's there that he met God, the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac, and Jacob. And from the chaos of a burning bush, God spoke to Moses and called him to free his people. You see a little bit of a theme here? Even in the chaos of life, God is still there leading and directing and guiding. So Moses went, although it was a little bit reluctant at times. God, if there's anybody else, send them. And God used him to bring 10 plagues of chaos to the Egyptian people and to Pharaoh. And after the 10th plague, the Israelite children were finally released from their captivity in Egypt. Oh, but not Pharaoh. Pharaoh had a different idea. Pharaoh only saw chaos in letting the people go. So he changed his mind and he pursued them. Pursued them so that he could capture them and bring them right back. And then we find in the 14th chapter of Exodus a scene of chaos. The people of Israel are trapped between a rock and a hard place. They're trapped between an army and water. Water is a continual theme here. They're trapped between this army that's chasing them, this Egyptian army that wants to kill them, and the chaos of the Red Sea. They're surrounded by chaos and they're afraid. I know a lot of people right now that are surrounded by this chaos because their life is turned upside down and they're afraid. But God is not a God of chaos. He's a God of order. So he says to Moses, I want you to do something for me. And in verse 14 he says, stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it. And out of faith Moses did. He raised up his hand and God pushed back the chaos of the water in order to create order and a pathway for the Israelites to escape the Egyptian army. And when they had escaped to freedom, what did he do? He again unleashed the chaos of water to destroy the army and to free his people. God brought order out of chaos. That wasn't nearly the end of the chaos, though, for the nation of Israel. And most of the chaos that Israel would face, it actually came from their own doing. Can I get an amen to that? You realize most of the chaos we face comes from our own doing. Eventually, the Hebrew children settled in the land that we now call Israel, but it wasn't easy. For hundreds of years, they had to fight for what God had promised them. They had to fight to get just even the littlest of things. God would send judges and prophets to help them along the way and help them overcome the chaos in order so that they could find order again. And eventually, they told God that they wanted a king. They got pretty big for their britches. They told God what they wanted. They wanted a king. So they wanted to be like the people around them, and they thought that the only way to do that was to get a king so the king would bring order. And they sought to bring order from chaos under their own terms. So God gave them what they wanted. He gave them a king. Saul became the king of Israel. Guess what? Things didn't get better. During Saul's reign, there continued to be chaos. The particular source of chaos for the Israelites was this group of people called the Philistines. Saul did his best to create order, but most of the time he was unsuccessful. One story of these Philistines you know well. It's found in 1 Samuel in chapter 17. The armies of Israel are facing off against the armies of the Philistines with a valley in between them. And the Philistines send out this guy. And you know who this guy is. The champion Goliath. Now, if there was ever a physical embodiment of chaos, it was Goliath. Let me build this picture for you. Goliath, the Bible tells us how tall he was. It says he was about 6 cubits tall. Now, I don't do measurements in cubits. I don't know about you. I can't even use the metric system, much less the cubit. But a cubit was about 18 inches. So 6 cubits would be about 108 inches. If you do the math, that's about 9.5 feet. That's a tall guy even by NBA standards. The average height of a man in this time was about 5.25 foot. So Goliath was almost twice as tall as the average man. He would have stood out. He would have towered above all of the rest of the army. There's a reason they call him a giant. He was a pretty intimidating figure. He was armored and had this armament that would have caused any man to tremble in their boots. It was intimidating. People feared him. There was reason they feared him. Yet David, the little servant boy, refused to give in to the chaos of Goliath and the Philistines. So while the other Israelites were scared to confront Goliath, David had a different idea. David had confidence. And he said to King Saul, he said these words, he said, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant, me, your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." Well, Saul, trying to be a good steward of what he has, Saul's like, there's no way I'm going to let you, a little boy, go and fight this. It's not going to happen, but David wasn't going to take no for an answer. David persisted, and the king eventually relented. And so David prepared to meet Goliath. And where did he go? He went to the water. He went to the chaos, because the chaos of the water had created these perfect little stones that he needed to defeat Goliath. So out of that chaos, David pulled something that had been ordered and used it. And you know the story. He didn't even take 5 stones. It was the first one. Took out the giant. Took out the chaos. David defeated him. And through the power of God, order was restored. in this chaos. The Israelites were able to defeat the Philistines, and life was good. And you know the story. Eventually David becomes the king of Israel, and he was finally able to unite the tribes more than Saul was able to, and to bring order to bring order back out to the region out of chaos again. Let's fast forward a few hundred years. David's descendants ruled this kingdom even after his death, but just 2 generations after David, this kingdom was entrenched in chaos again. Eventually the nation of Israel is divided into two. And we know those two sides. The northern kingdom is Israel and the southern kingdom is Judah. And they were taken captive and into this time of exile. The temple of David's son, Solomon, had been built. It was a building that represented the presence of God. It was a man-made temple to represent his presence. A God of order amidst chaos, and it was destroyed. What man tried to create was destroyed. And about 70 years after Judah went into exile, they were able to return to their land, but it wasn't quite the same. I'm going to be honest, I have a fear. When we're able to return, it's not going to be quite the same. Maybe that's a good thing. They had their land, but it wasn't really their own. They were a vassal state. They were just in the land, but they didn't own the land. The people of Israel longed for a Messiah. Well, here's a word. Who would overthrow the chaos. We can't do it anymore. We need somebody else. We need something else to do it. They wanted the chaos of their oppressors, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Romans, all these people that are creating this chaos. They want to be free from it. So just like Moses of old, they longed for a redeemer who would set them free. And then in the midst of the chaos of a Roman census, guess what happens? A baby's born. That's not who we were looking for, but a baby's born, a descendant of King David. And only a couple of years after this baby's birth, he was even escaped the chaos of slaughter. Bethlehem's sons, the slaughter of Bethlehem's sons that were 3 years and younger. He traveled to a location of the Israelites' captivity in Egypt, and when he was older, he even visited the temple in Jerusalem along with his family, and amidst the chaos that Mary and Joseph thought when he disappeared, here he is, creating order in the temple. Well, after a number of years, Jesus is even led by the Spirit into the wilderness, into the chaos. After visiting the chaos of the waters of baptism. You see this theme of water? So what does Jesus do? He comes out of the wilderness. He comes out of the chaos, and he gathers 12 guys. 12 very chaotic guys. A fisherman, a zealot, a tax collector, some others. Not the most upstanding people in society. One day these guys were out on the Sea of Galilee, and Jesus was taking a nap in the boat. You know this story. Suddenly chaos broke loose. The storm come up. And his buddies, his disciples, they begin to get scared because the water's crashing into the boat and it's going over the bow, and they're afraid the boat's going to sink, but Jesus is steadily asleep in the stern. He's just as peaceful as he can be. So what do? They cry out, Jesus, help us. We're panicked and we can't do this. We need you. Well, Jesus doesn't jump up in a panic like we do at 3 a.m. when we hear something at the door. Nah, he just woke up. What is your problem? We're scared. We need you because of this chaos. And Jesus just simply calms the storm. Out of chaos, he brings order. On another occasion, the disciples were in the boat again, but Jesus wasn't with them this time. He had sent them on ahead. And he stayed behind and he's praying. But they find themselves in the middle of another storm in a boat. But this time Jesus is not with them. And they panic. And this one, the story in Matthew, they don't seem to be quite as upset as they do in this one when Jesus is not in the boat with them. But Jesus was still with them. They just didn't realize it. And the story tells us that in the fourth watch, which is somewhere between 3 and 6 o'clock in the morning, as the disciples are panicked and they're afraid for their life in the chaos of this storm, Jesus comes walking across the water. to catch up with them and maybe even go ahead of them. And they see him and they think he's a ghost. Well, Peter, the loudmouth, recognizes him. And you know Peter's story. You know this story. Peter calls out to him, if it's really you, tell me to walk out on the water and I'll follow you. I'll come to you. And I could just see Jesus in this. All right, bro, come on. So what does Peter do? I don't know if it was because he was too afraid to admit that he was afraid, or I don't know if he was too proud to tell his buddies that I can't do this because I've opened my mouth now. But Peter gets out of the boat, keeps his eyes squarely on Jesus. And what does he do? He walks on the water, just as Jesus told him to. Even amid the chaos, it doesn't tell us that the storm ceased for Peter to walk on water. Even in the chaos of the storm, Peter's walking across the water to Jesus because he told him to, it's me, come to me. When does he begin to fall? When does he begin to fail? When he takes his eyes off Jesus and realizes the storm is still raging and there's still chaos all around him. He begins to fall. Wasn't very long after that, just a short time actually, after the peace of the boats, Jesus enters into this period of chaos. And it's chaos that didn't stand still with a word. He didn't still the chaos of this occasion by climbing out of a boat, or by shaking up a rock, or by holding a staff out, or by separating waters. Instead, Jesus endured this chaos. Isaiah 53 gives us the description of this chaos. I'm just going to read it in its whole. Listen to this. He was despised and rejected by others, a man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity. I think this is out of the English Standard Version, by the way. A man of suffering and acquainted with infirmity. And as one from whom others hid their faces, he was despised, and we held no account of him. Surely he has borne our infirmities and carried our diseases, yet we accounted him stricken, struck down by God and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole, and by his bruises we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We've all turned to our own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of all of us. He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, he like a sheep that before it shears is silent, so he did not open his mouth. By a perversion of justice, he was taken away. Who could have imagined his future? For he was cut off from the land of the living, stricken for the transgressions of my people. They made his grave with the wicked and his tomb with the rich, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him with pain. When you make his life an offering for sin, he shall see his offspring and shall prolong his days. Through him the will of the Lord will prosper. Out of his anguish he shall see light. He shall find satisfaction through his knowledge. The righteous one, my servant, will take many righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will allot him a portion with the great, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out himself to death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sin of many, and made intercession for the transgressors. Chaos. That is the pure definition of chaos. What Jesus did on the cross. Pure, unadulterated chaos. That's the description that we just read. It's the description of the journey that Jesus took to the cross some 2,000 years ago. He endured the chaos of the cross. Why? In order to bring order out of chaos. Listen to those words. Upon him was the punishment that made us whole. The punishment that brought us peace. The Bible says that in other translations, this one I read says transgressions. Some say the punishments. The things that were owed to us, the things that were due to us, he took. The chaos that Jesus endured on the cross brought us order. Think about that. By his wounds we are healed. He bore our sins to make intercession for us. He bore the chaos that we deserve so that we can have peace. Man, I wish that we had time to examine all these other stories in the Bible, because there's lots of them that I could tell you. Gideon, Ruth, Josiah, Noah, Jonah, Samson. We could go into the New Testament and talk about some of the characters in the New Testament, the disciples even, Paul. There's all these people that we could talk about, their stories of how God brought order out of the chaos of their life. We just don't have time, but we can look at history. We can see God bringing about order from the chaos all throughout the history of the world. We can see God bringing about order from chaos throughout the history of the church, throughout the history of the Bible. But if we take it even more personal, God is working right now to bring order into your chaos. Some of us share the same chaos right now. Some of us share the lack of understanding of what's about to happen. Some of us share the lack of understanding of why we're where we're at. I'm sure at some point in the last week or two, you've just said, why? What's happening? What's the point? It's chaos. If you want the definition of chaos, go to Walmart when they open in the morning. It's crazy. If you want the definition of chaos, be there when that last package of toilet paper comes off the shelf. It's insanity. But it's a very real chaos that we're living today. But can I just tell you, the God that was there when nothing existed but the chaos of the water, the God that existed when the people were making their own way bad, the God that told Moses to raise your staff and the waters will be parted and you will be saved from the chaos, the God that raised King David, the boy that defeated the giant, that raised him to lead his people free, the God that gave his son for you and for me, is the same God that exists in the chaos of the world that we live in today. He is not a God of chaos. He's a God of order. I can promise you one thing. I can't promise you that you're not going to get sick from COVID-19. I can't promise you that someone that we know may not even die from it. I can't promise you that the job that you had will be the job that you go back to. I can't promise you that life will look like it's always looked. I can't even promise you that 6 months from now we'll be here. But what I can promise you is that whatever our chaos looks like, God is still a God of order. Even if the order just exists in your heart, to know that you have the joy and the peace of mind of knowing who you are in Him, to carry us through this. He's still God. He's still in the God business. And you may walk out of here this morning and still be just as scared as you were when you got here. You're going to walk out of here today and there's still not going to be any more answers than there were this morning when you got here. I can tell you that. But no matter what you read, no matter what you hear, no matter what you see, no matter how bad it gets, just trust that the God that we serve is not a God of chaos, but a God of order. I want to tell you one story, and then we'll get out of here. Oklahoma City's been on my mind a lot in the last couple of weeks for probably obvious reasons. Is it yesterday or the day before that I guess gas got below $1 in Oklahoma City in some places? And I thought it was kind of comical. I was in college when it went above $1, and Brady's out there in college when it went back below $1. But we were also out there, I was out there when the federal building was bombed. So there's been that little part of me that's always had a connection to Oklahoma City. And so I've got a book in my office about, the book's titled 903, Where Was God at 903? And there's stories that come out of the chaos of that building. All of us watched 9/11 happen. All of us have seen these catastrophes, but to be face to face with it and see it is a totally different thing. And to be downtown in front of that building about an hour after it happened and to see some of it unfold firsthand, it kind of comes home a little bit. And there's a particular story about a guy that worked on about the 7th or 8th floor. I can't remember the office that he worked in. He tells this story of his office. And he'll tell you that he was a churchgoer, but he wasn't really a faithful Christian. But he attended. He checked the boxes, as some of us tend to do. But that morning, he was sitting at his desk, and he was not as prepared for that morning as he was supposed to be, or as he normally was. So at about 9:01 and a half, he realized he didn't have everything that he needed, so he got up from his desk and he walked over to the other side of his office to get into a file cabinet. The file cabinet wouldn't open. So he had to wrestle with the file cabinet to finally get it open, and when he got it open was when he could go and get his file that he needed to go back to his desk and do his work. Well, somewhere between being at his file cabinet and going back to his desk, the clock struck 9:02. And when the dust settled and the chaos was over, his desk didn't exist anymore. He was about 3 feet from where his office fell into the street. And he said it dawned on him, whether if it's real or not, for some reason God chose. For some reason I had to get up because I did something wrong this morning and be at a place where I was saved in this. So he says, my life mission now is to go and show people that even in chaos, God is still there. I promise you, it doesn't matter what happens tomorrow. It doesn't matter what happens next week or next month. God is not a God of chaos. He's a God of order. You can trust in that. It's factual. You can go back and read it. It's proven. It will continue to be proven. So can we trust in that? There's going to be chaos. It's going to be different. Shoot, we're going to be chaotic next week because we're going to be different. We're chaotic right now because we're different. We don't know what it's going to look like, but trust that God is a God of order. And take hope in that. Take peace in that. Take comfort in that as the days and the weeks and the months unfold. Can we at least do that much? So, stand with me. Moises, would you mind praying for us to dismiss us this morning?